Welcome back, everyone. Following up on our 1976 Ford F-250 project. Today, I want to do a quick video on the EGR system, exhaust gas recirculation system. It made a big impact on the Ford 360's engine's performance, and it's still an issue today. My 2006 Ford Powerstroke has an EGR system that can be problematic. So I'm going to do a quick video today talking about how the EGR system worked on this vehicle and the impact it made. So the EGR systems were put in place to try to meet emission standards starting in the 1970s. And basically, it's what the name sounds like. It recirculates the exhaust gas from your engine. So the way that they did this on the 1976 Ford was on your head, you had two ports, one on each side, taking from one cylinder on each side of the engine. It took the exhaust gases through this port here. It entered in through your intake manifold, through this port here, up to the intake manifold, into the EGR valve. This was the EGR valve. The exhaust gases came up through here, entered the EGR valve through this opening right here. When the EGR valve opened, this opening here released the exhaust gases into the engine to be recirculated. Now, the 360 engine was a lower compression engine. Ford made it a lower compression engine in the trucks for lower end torque, also to deal with some of the octane issues with fuel. The 360s and 390s actually had different pistons for the trucks and the cars to get the compression up. But the 360 kind of had a reputation of being a little bit of a kind of a dog, kind of a slower wrapping engine, not as performative. It was lower compression and it had some breathing issues. So when you put in the EGR system, that made a bad situation worse. It further affected performance. Now, I've always asked the question, why recirculating the gas just from two cylinders made a difference with emissions, but I guess that's beside the point. One of the issues, though, is you can see here the carbon buildup in the EGR ports that would happen. And this is a natural result of running recirculated gas through these ports where you have limited flow. And the flow is limited by your EGR valve. It was to only allow the exhaust gas to be released into the system when the engine was warm and over a certain amount of RPMs. If the EGR gases were allowed to enter the engine at an idle, it would be a very rough idle and probably have a hard time staying running with that at a low speed. So it was around 2,000 RPMs was when they were trying to release the gases in at an operating temperature to recirculate that gas. As you can imagine, when the engine already has breathing issues, to release hot exhaust gases back into the system that don't have any oxygen, it really affected the engine's performance. And if you can imagine your carburetor sitting on top here, mixing your air and fuel, that air and fuel mixture is going into the engine, and right at this point is where the exhaust gas is reintroduced. It's hot, and it's there's no oxygen. It affects the ability of the fuel mixture to detonate. Now, on the newer systems, like on my 2006 Ford, they actually run the EGR gases through a cooler before running it in and to try to help offset some of those issues. But I can't believe after all this time they haven't figured out a better way to deal with this emission issues. So again, your exhaust port here, exhaust gases come up through this system, and fortunately or unfortunately, what happened a lot is if you look here, you can see the carbon that built up on these engines that came in through the exhaust gas. Now, if the exhaust gases were flowing through all the time, it'd probably help keep this cleaner. But what happened with a lot of these, and you can see this one was nearly completely clogged off. Now that probably would have, definitely, you can see here, this was the opening that was remaining. We opened this engine up. That would really help your engine's performance, believe it or not, by eliminating the amount of exhaust gases that could recirculate in your engine. But a lot of times these EGR valves would stick open. So when that would happen, you'd have exhaust gases running through all the time. and the engines would run terribly at idle, and you would have a significant power loss. I remember my uncle working on an engine for a friend of ours that had a brand new truck, and shortly after he got it, it had some significant idling issues, running issues. He took it back to the dealer, and they weren't really able to diagnose it. My uncle figured out that it was the EGR valve was stuck open. Now, a lot of guys back in the day would disable this, and it doesn't require because there's no electronics, because there's no cooling system. It was pretty simple to bypass or delete the EGR system. A lot of guys would make an additional gasket here that would just simply block off this opening. They could put the EGR valve back on, so externally the engine looked like it was fully had a fully functioning EGR system. Some people would even put RGV or silicone in to fill this hole just to close it off to keep those exhaust gases from entering. But on the 360, it did make a big impact with lower compression and with breathability issues. It caused an issue. I know today, a lot of, especially the newer diesels, you've got constant problems with EGR. I think we can figure out a better way. When we go back with converted this to a 390, one of the things that the new intake manifold will not be compatible, will not have the EGR ports. So that will significantly affect the way the engine runs. But anyway, in short, that's the way the EGR system worked on these, and it made a difference on how they worked. Thank you.